we've come a long way pretty fast in the stock market. Valuations are high. There's notions of a potential bubble around AI and the AI spend and AI stocks. So a pullback like this, 5% or so, is not crazy, especially in a year where we've had such aggressive gains.
This is Today As It Happened. Good Friday evening to you. I'm Stephanie Liebergen here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day, from volatility on Wall Street to President Donald Trump's latest trade moves impacting goods like coffee and fruit. But first, this morning our congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed gave us a look at some of the lingering issues in the wake of the longest federal government shutdown ever. The federal government shutdown finally over, but there's still some lingering questions about what exactly is going to come next for healthcare, especially with it being open enrollment season. So what do we know about those Obamacare subsidies and their future, knowing that they're currently set to expire at the end of the year?
Right, and there's a very good chance that Congress will not deal with this before the end of open enrollment at the end of this month. So again, no guarantee there that they'll be addressed in any way, shape, or form. Let's talk about what is happening to counteract that higher cost of health care. In the House of Representatives, there's no guarantee for a vote. The Senate, remember, has that guaranteed vote on extending these Affordable Care Act subsidies. That was part of that agreement to reopen the government that was reached earlier this week, over the weekend, last weekend. This House of Representatives has no similar such guarantee. Democrats are actually taking a page out of the Epstein playbook, and I'll explain that in a second, to try and force a vote on expanding those Affordable Care Act subsidies. So they've started this petition, this so-called discharge petition, trying to get to that 218 signature mark to force House Speaker Mike Johnson to take a vote on extending Affordable Care Act subsidies. To be clear, this is effectively a Hail Mary, far cry from happening. Speaker Johnson has not committed to holding a vote on these subsidies. Democrats are trying this as a rogue effort to see if they can get Republicans to sign on to this effort and force a vote on extending these subsidies. And even if, again, similar situation to the Epstein files, even if the House approves an extension, the Senate approves an extension, there's no guarantee President Donald Trump wants an extension of these Affordable Care Act tax credits. A lot of Republicans in Congress still do not like the Affordable Care Act. They refer to it as Obamacare. They point out that it passed with no Republican support by President Barack Obama all the way back during his first term. Furthermore, there's a lot of frustration about the lack of ability for Republicans to come up with their own health care plan to counter the Affordable Care Act. Remember, they've been trying since President Trump's first term back in 2017 to find some way to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act with a Republican health care plan. Up to this point, a lot of ideas in Congress, no single solution. Absent one, really hard to see how these Affordable Care Act tax credits get extended. They face, at best, Stephanie, an uphill battle.
Certainly do, and something that the president has long talked about, introducing a new health care plan, but never really putting something together and making it public what exactly that new health care plan might look like. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed, thank you very much. And some other headlines we're following this morning. The Trump administration joined a legal challenge Thursday to block California's effort to use new congressional maps for the 2026 midterms. Now, California voters approved a ballot measure last week to replace maps drawn by an independent commission with a new one that would lean more Democratic in 5 House districts. Now, the federal involvement signals a major escalation in the nationwide redistricting fight as Republicans are hoping to maintain their majority in the House. And the BBC apologized to President Trump Thursday for misleadingly editing his January 6th speech, but the network rejected his defamation claim as the president's lawyer was threatening to file a $1 billion lawsuit. The British broadcaster admitted its documentary incorrectly spliced together parts of Trump's speech that were an hour apart, creating a false impression that he directly called for violence. Now, the apology comes after President Trump's recent settlements with CBS and ABC News, totaling more than $30 million. Washington is carefully watching the latest developments on the Epstein files. House Speaker Mike Johnson will schedule a vote on releasing all the case files after determining really the effort couldn't be stopped. The bipartisan bill, led by Republican Thomas Massie and Democrat Ro Khanna, is expected to draw significant GOP support despite President Trump's continued opposition.
Republicans, they're not going to vote to help shield Epstein and all the information on there. In the end, we know transparency is best. Let's protect the names of the victims. That's my view. If we can protect the victims' names, then everything else, let's put it out. And I know there's concerns. There may be someone like, okay, we had dinner with Epstein. We didn't do anything but dinner. Okay, just tell people that. Be honest about what happened and your relationship with them. If your name happens to be in there, I think we'll be fine. But most people are now very cynical. And the only way to beat this is to open up the books, put sunlight on it, and let the chips fall where they fall.
And now let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day. Russia launched a massive attack on Ukraine early Friday, killing at least 6 people and injuring dozens more. The assault used more than 430 drones and 18 missiles, primarily targeting Kyiv, where the explosions hit apartment buildings. Ukraine's president says it was a calculated attack to harm civilians. Ukraine responded with its own drone strikes on Russian oil facilities. The Mecklenburg County Sheriff says federal officials plan to deploy U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents as early as this weekend. Details of the operation in North Carolina remain undisclosed. Local authorities have not been asked to assist. President Trump has defended sending federal agents into Democratic-run cities to enforce immigration policies. Local activists and officials are preparing the immigrant community by sharing resources and trying to calm fears. Canadian travel to the U.S. continues to plummet, with new data showing air travel dropped nearly 24% last month, and car travel fell more than 30% compared to a year ago. It's the 10th straight month of declining trips from Canada into the U.S. The drop comes amid tensions over the Trump administration's tariffs and rhetoric, spurring calls for Canadians to spend their money at home. Shohei Ohtani made history Thursday night, unanimously winning his 4th MVP award. He's the 2nd player ever to reach that milestone. The Dodgers star led the National League with 55 home runs and a 1.014 OPS, while also returning to pitching. In the American League, Aaron Judge won his 3rd MVP award after leading the majors with a .331 batting average and 53 home runs for the Yankees. Coming up on Today's It Happened.
I mean, when you look at Southeast Asia and South America, that's where we get a lot of this stuff. You know, the coffee, the cocoa, the bananas, those kinds of things. So this is a natural outgrowth of exactly what the president signaled.
Welcome back to Today's It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories. The Georgia election interference case will continue under new leadership after a major setback. Pete Skandalakis, executive director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia, announced today he will personally take over the case. Fulton County DA Fani Willis was disqualified over her romantic relationship with the special prosecutor, something the court said created an appearance of impropriety. The case involves 14 defendants, including former Trump officials Mark Meadows and Rudy Giuliani. President Trump, though, is unlikely to face prosecution while he's in office. The Trump administration is officially scrapping a plan that would have required airlines to pay cash compensation for flight delays. The Transportation Department said the Biden-era proposal would create unnecessary regulatory burdens on airlines. The plan would have paid passengers $200 to $775 for delays of 3 hours or more. 18 Democratic senators urged the Trump administration not to drop the compensation plan, calling it common sense. The U.S. does not require airlines to compensate passengers for delays, unlike the European Union and Canada. The most advanced U.S. aircraft carrier is heading toward Venezuelan waters in a major show of military force not seen in Latin America for generations. It's the USS Gerald R. Ford, and it's expected to arrive within days as part of what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth calls Operation Southern Spear. The Trump administration says it's focused on fighting drug trafficking, but experts disagree on whether the U.S. will use the carrier to pressure Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to step down. The 100,000-ton warship carries thousands of sailors and dozens of warplanes that can strike targets deep inside another country.
Argentinian beef could soon be headed toward your dinner table. A proposed settlement between the U.S. and Argentina could quadruple beef export quotas and reduce tariffs. The deal would allow Argentina to export 80,000 tons of beef to the United States. The tariff would be 10%. That is up from the current 20,000 tons. President Trump championing that deal with Argentina's President Milei, who welcomed it. The deal with Argentina, by the way, is one of many as the White House continues to try and convince Americans it is on the right side of the affordability debate. Administration announcing trade deals with Guatemala, Argentina, Ecuador, and El Salvador. Now, goods that would be affected are things like coffee and bananas. Also, a deal with Switzerland would lower that country's tariff rate to about 15%. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull is live now on the North Lawn to break down the details. And Haley, what do we know about this deal with the Swiss?
Well, it's one of a slew of trade frameworks the White House is announcing over the course of the last 24 hours, but it is significant that the Swiss government announcing the intent for the U.S. to reduce its tariff rate to 15%. It comes on the heels of officials meeting in Washington, and according to a memorandum of understanding between the nations, the U.S. will drop that rate while the Swiss will also lower duties on industrial and agricultural products, while Swiss companies intend to invest about $200 billion in the United States. The United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer says he expects the trade deficit with Switzerland to be eliminated, for the Swiss to remove those barriers and open up markets for things like poultry and other products, as well as to buy more Boeings. Now, he also announced, or rather the administration also announced, and we have seen officials tout over the past 24 hours, those frameworks with a number of other nations in the Western Hemisphere. It includes Guatemala, El Salvador, and Argentina at a rate of 10%, as well as Ecuador at 15%. Now, senior administration officials say as part of those frameworks that those markets will open for agricultural products, that they will not impose digital services taxes, and that for some there are provisions specifically when it comes to critical minerals. Additionally, when it comes to food tariffs, Ambassador Greer saying this.
I mean, we've really reached that critical mass where we've started to reshape the global trade system in a way that we think is better for America, and so now is the right time to to release some of these items that the president said he was going to release. And I mean, when you look at Southeast Asia and South America, that's where we get a lot of this stuff. The coffee, the cocoa, the bananas, those kinds of things. So this is a natural outgrowth of exactly what the president signaled, and that's what he's doing today.
And of course, the tariff policy is a major component of the White House's broader economic policy. It is being challenged in the courts right now, so much of that policy hinges on how the Supreme Court decides on it, Dell.
Haley, at the same time, though, the administration continues to face economic concerns from Americans. How is the White House navigating that?
Yeah, the White House is pushing its economic message, appearing to convince Americans that their plan is working. And what we have seen them do is highlight factors that they believe are positive, things like wage growth, purchasing power, and progress on inflation, while at the same time, officials acknowledging that they still have more work to do. President Trump weighing in on social media today, writing, quote, "Cost and inflation were far higher under the sleepy Joe Biden administration than they are now. In fact, costs under the Trump administration are tumbling down, helped greatly by gasoline and energy. Affordability is a lie when used by the Dems. It is a complete con job." This comes as the White House is focusing on that word affordability. One official saying that President Trump will take his message out there, his economic message out there, as they try to sway Americans that this is a plan that they have that is working.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull for us live on the North Lawn. Haley, thank you very much.
Coming up on Today As It Happened, could Republican senators sue the Justice Department for accessing their phone records? A controversial provision in the bill to reopen the government cleared the way for just that. Stay with us for Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty's analysis from our DC studio. That's straight ahead. And later,
I'm John Matarese. Everyone is talking about affordability these days, even right here in the toy aisles. So I'll show you how to find some hot but still affordable toys the kids will love.
welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories.
In Washington, it is a well-known fact that the large print giveth and the fine print taketh away. In this case, the fine print is in that bill that just cleared the House that is getting a lot of attention. It seems that clean CR was not so clean. Our political director, Andrew Rafferty, joins us live. And Raff, what is inside this bill that didn't really make the headlines?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Del, how many times have you and I sat here during the shutdown and played sound from lawmakers saying, we could reopen the government tomorrow if only we had something that didn't have any other provisions. Nothing else, just reopen the government and budget it appropriately. Well, now that we've seen the government reopen, we're a couple days removed from this, it turns out there were a couple provisions in there that maybe make it not as clean as some of these lawmakers had made it out to be. One of them has to do with hemp, and this is really interesting because if you go back to 2018, it was that Farm Bill that created this carve-out for hemp, for THC, that American farmers could produce it and do so legally. But the language that we saw in the bill that has passed and since been signed by the president would recriminalize many hemp-related products. And as you can imagine, hemp farmers across the country and those involved in the industry are really raising the alarm bells here. And going back to 2018, it was Mitch McConnell, then the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, who supported this because of the importance or potential importance that hemp production could have to farmers in his home state of Kentucky. And we did see Rand Paul, the other senator from Kentucky, try to make a last-ditch effort to sort of undo this before it ultimately got passed. It has, so far, he was unsuccessful, but there is a chance, there is some bipartisan work being done on Capitol Hill right now to sort of roll some of this back. There is an acknowledgement from the industry, from even Rand Paul, those who are supportive, that there has since 2018 been some bad actors that have essentially made these intoxicating, made synthetic products, have made it so that that didn't really adhere to the spirit of the law, even though it might have been the letter of the law. But they do have some time to sort of figure it out. But there is a lot of panic among not only those involved in the industry, but the Americans who also are reliant on these products. We know elderly, those who have PTSD, there are a lot of medical uses for them.
Yeah, glaucoma. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Also a lot of outrage over a part of the legislation that allows members of Congress to sue if they find out that they were involved in an investigation.
Yeah, this is really interesting because it was a rare moment where you have Republicans in one house kind of distancing themselves from the leadership of the other house. This was a provision that essentially goes back to the January 6th, that Jack Smith investigation. 8 senators ultimately had their information collected through Jack Smith's work, and they added a provision. It's unclear exactly who did it. You're seeing the 8 on the screen who had their data collected, their phone records specifically. But this would allow them to sue the government for $500,000 if the government does take their information, their phone records, without their knowledge. Now, what's interesting is Mike Johnson, this only applies to senators, number one. So Mike Johnson, the leader of Republicans in the House, says they are going to vote on a repeal of that. And since then, you have seen of those 8 members on your screen, pretty close to 7 of them, I think some haven't really said either way, said, yeah, we're not going to take any money. It's been Lindsey Graham was the only one who has said, heck yeah, I'm going to sue the government so something like this never happens again. But even Speaker Johnson saying that John Thune, the leader of Republicans in the Senate, was regretful over how this all played out.
You're saying, I guess, that in Washington, it depends on what your definition of clean is.
That's right.
Our political director, Andrew Rafferty. Raff, as always, thank you very much.
Budget friendly is the theme in the toy aisles these days, where many parents are looking for hot but still affordable toys. And if you're looking for something specific, experts say you may want to shop sooner rather than later because there's always the chance of some of them selling out.
Find everything okay?
With tariff price hikes and possible shortages in mind, Allison Desch wants to get her kids' toys early.
I'm always last minute.
Wise choice, according to Marcy Harmon, owner of Flying Pig Toys.
We have definitely seen some increases in prices. Mostly things made in China, I feel like have increased the most. However, also my brands that do come from Europe have had some increases, especially ones that are wooden toys.
To help parents, she stocked her shelves with items under $30. From dolls
This one is $29.99.
to Legos and Minecraft.
This is the new one that just came in, $24.99.
James Zahn, senior editor of the Toy Insider, says Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals are starting to surface. The wild card, though, is inventory. Zahn says holiday stock arrived late due to production shutdowns in China earlier this year.
If a product becomes really hot, there's not a guarantee that it's going to get restocked in time.
For hot toys on a budget, Zahn has these recommendations: Slime Mart's baskets and bags.
This one has the hamburger in it.
Our Generation limited edition Christmas dolls. Tabletop game Cownado.
Oh, there it goes.
Counterball. And for just $6.97 at Walmart, farting fugglers.
This means funny, ugly monster. There are tons of these to collect.
At her store, Harmon expects Wicked products to sell wicked fast.
We have lots of Wicked Legos. We have Wicked ornaments.
Toy experts say don't delay so you don't waste your money. John Mattery, Scripps News Group.
Up next on Today As It Happened.
A government shutdown hangover is hitting Wall Street. I'm Maura Barrett. Coming up, why missing jobs and inflation data has markets sliding.
And later,
we are in this mess because Donald Trump refused to address cost of health insurance because the Republicans refuse to address it. And I understand that there are a lot of Democrats who think that the only way to stand up to Donald Trump was to keep the government shut down.
we're glad you're back with Today As It Happened. I'm Stephanie Liebergen here with your daily rundown of today's top stories.
A hamburger from a family barbecue proving deadly for a 47-year-old New Jersey man. Researchers at UVA saying a tick bite triggered an allergy to red meat. It is the first time a tick bite is actually killed. The healthy father of two died just 4 hours after eating beef last summer. The Lone Star tick can make people allergic to a sugar found in some meats. Doctors say severe stomach pain 3 to 5 hours after eating red meat should be investigated immediately. Two families are suing ByHeart after their 4-month-old daughters developed infantile botulism they say was caused by the formula. One had to be flown to a children's hospital for weeks of treatment. The other was rushed to the hospital last week when the symptoms got worse. The rare and potentially deadly disease is part of a nationwide outbreak that has sickened at least 15 infants in 12 states. ByHeart announcing a nationwide recall on Tuesday. SNAP recipients can expect to get all of their November benefits in their EBT cards no later than Monday. The suspension of that SNAP funding stressed millions who rely on them, also placing a large burden on food banks trying to fill the gaps. It also sparked confusion among states as courts weighed whether the federal government was obligated to cover the states during the shutdown. As a result, some states paid full benefits, some paid partial benefits, and some paid none. Another down day on Wall Street with mixed results at the closing bell. As you can see, the Dow closing down 309 points. Investors still concerned about delays in economic data like the monthly jobs report. Those numbers delayed because of the government shutdown. That could signal that the Fed will delay another rate cut. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett is tracking the markets for us. And Maura, did I get it right? What factors contributed to the slide?
You absolutely did, Del. And the key thing here is that markets rely on information. And so when we saw the market drop yesterday, it was kind of this government shutdown hangover, if you will, because they were held back from a lot of this key economic information like jobs, earnings reports. And so we did see the indexes today jumping back ever so slightly, kind of leveling out just under, except for the Dow, which you saw still under about 300 points. And this follows Thursday's closing plunge. That was the worst single-day drop in nearly a month. The worst part of all of this is, I will say, is that market experts say to prepare for more volatility to close out 2026.
The government shutdown over, but the economic effects will linger, according to Kevin Hassett, the director of the National Economic Council.
Our Council of Economic Advisors said that it cost about $15 billion a week.
Wall Street responded on Thursday, sinking to its worst day in a month. Traders also questioned whether cuts to interest rates will actually happen, considering the delay in economic data, like the monthly jobs report or inflation metrics, leaving officials without the full picture. Investopedia's Caleb Silver says investors initially entered the second half of the year expecting multiple cuts.
Now the picture looks a little bit cloudier because we don't have hard government data, but the Federal Reserve is looking at the fact that prices continue to rise, that's inflation due to tariffs and other causes, and the labor market is slowing.
Earlier this week, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt blamed Democrats for the lack of, quote, critical government data.
The Democrats may have permanently damaged the federal statistical system with October CPI and jobs reports likely never being released.
Hassett says data will be compiled and released, but confirms some information will stay in the dark.
But we will never know what the unemployment rate was in October because there wasn't a household survey.
With high valuations and anxiety around an AI bubble, Silver says it's understandable for investors to be on edge.
A pullback like this, 5% or so, is not crazy, especially in a year where we've had such aggressive gains.
So Scripps News reached out to the government agencies to find out when some of this critical data will be made public following the shutdown. Just before I came on air with you, Del, the Bureau of Labor Statistics updated their release schedule. They'll be putting out the employment and earnings numbers by the end of next week. So November 20th and 21st is when we're expecting. That's more than a month after it was originally set to be released because of the shutdown. The Bureau of Economic Analysis also tells me that they're working to update their schedule. But so far across the board, nothing to indicate that an entire month's report will be skipped, Del.
Mara, prior to yesterday's steep sell-off, investors were betting that Jerome Powell and the Fed would cut the key interest rate by at least 1/4 of a point next month. What are they thinking now?
There was initially a lot of hope for that. We know that the Fed cut its interest rate by 1/4 of a percentage point at each of the last 2 meetings, and that was after a bulk of this year was spent holding steady. And so those cuts that we saw in part were to prevent a serious rise in unemployment. Right now, though, it's looking like more of a toss-up about what the Fed will do, especially considering these missing data points. Another rate cut is not guaranteed. The market's predicting actually it's more of a 50-50 shot right now. And ultimately, cutting rates would help protect the labor market, but keeping rates the same would be a move to help combat inflation. So that data that they're missing out on is really essential here, Del.
Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett for us live in Denver. Mara, as always, thank you very much. All eyes on Washington, watching for the latest developments on the Epstein files. Momentum is growing for that House vote to release the files. The House Speaker saying he will schedule the vote after determining the effort could not be stopped. The bipartisan bill, led by Republican Thomas Massie and Democrat Ro Khanna, is expected to draw significant Republican support despite President Trump's continued opposition. Our congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed has more.
The House of Representatives will vote next week on a bill to force the release of all of the government's files on Jeffrey Epstein. The vote will bring an end to the long saga in the House of Representatives, culminating in a nearly 8-week-long recess as Speaker Mike Johnson kept the House of Representatives out of D.C. for nearly the full duration of the government shutdown. Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva, who was sworn in this week after a long delay, becoming the final signature on a petition to compel Speaker Johnson to hold a vote on the bill to release the files nearly immediately after she was sworn in. You believe that the delay for your swearing in was directly related to your decision to sign on to this petition to release the Epstein files?
Yes, I do.
This week, the bill's lead Republican sponsor, Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, telling reporters he believes even more Republicans will support the final vote on releasing the files, telling the Scripps News Group that his fellow Republicans should not worry about potential backlash from the White House.
This vote will last longer than the president will be in office. They'll be accountable for this vote in 2028. They'll be accountable for this vote in 2030. And do they always want to have on their record that they voted to cover up for pedophiles? Because President Trump's not always going to be able to come to their district and campaign for them or give them some tele-town hall endorsement.
President Trump on Truth Social Friday posting about what he calls the, quote, Epstein hoax, calling out, quote, some weak Republicans for joining with Democrats in their push to release the files. The president ending the post, quote, don't waste your time with Trump. I have a country to run. While the House vote seems likely to pass, there's no guarantee the bill will come up for a vote in the U.S. Senate. And President Donald Trump has made no secret his thoughts on the proposal, meaning even if the bill defies the odds and passes both chambers of Congress, it could still face a presidential veto. The controversy surrounding the Trump administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case, though, not going away anytime soon. Nathaniel Reed, Scripps News Group, Washington.
Coming up on Today's It Happened.
Electricity is up by about 10%.
Natural gas is up about 8%. Those are real increases. For a low-income family, that can make a difference between, paying your food bill and paying your home energy bill.
You're watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's jump right in.
We're joined now by Mark Wolf, who is the Executive Director of the National Energy Assistance Directors Association. Mr. Wolf, thanks for being with us. A lot of attention is being paid to SNAP and healthcare, as you know, but as winter approaches, are we looking at another crisis? There are 6 million homes in this country with people that can't afford to heat their homes.
No question. It's a continuing struggle because home energy is expensive. The average cost of home energy this year will be about $1,000. So, in the last discussion, the last reporter who was speaking said that the administration said that energy prices were down. Well, gasoline prices are down, and that's true, but gasoline and the cost of home heating are two very separate, different fuels. But electricity is up by about 10%. Natural gas is up by about 8%. Those are real increases. For a low-income family, that can make a difference between, paying your food bill and paying your home energy bill. But what's really interesting here, and I think this is the important point, is that as prices go up, you have less money for other things. And we're now hearing not just from poor families who struggle to pay their bills, but also moderate income and even middle income families are complaining because we're coming on top of one of the highest summers ever for summer cooling. So as families adjusted to a much higher cost of cooling their home last summer, they're now looking at a higher cost to heat their home as well. I think that's very, very difficult for some.
Mark, as we go into the winter months, we hear so much talk when it was SNAP about families having to go hungry. And you're right, some people will be making the decision between heating their house and eating. But are you worried that we're going to start opening up doors and finding people that simply freeze to death?
Yes. Families, especially the elderly, they'll be reluctant to turn on the heat. They'll turn it down really low. If you have a health condition, you can become sick and die. It happens. It happens in the summer, it happens in the winter. And because the primary program that helps family pay their home heating bill, the low-income home energy assistance program, the money still hasn't been released. We might not see money to help families till mid-December. That's primarily because of the shutdown in the government. When the government shut down, the administration had no authority to release those funds. So we're looking at a very difficult winter heating season that could cause some people to, even die. That's how serious it becomes. And I think that as you move forward, you think about the cost of home heating. A low-income family might spend 10, 12% of their income on their home energy budget, where a better-off family only spends about 3%. But that's because as your income goes up, your use of energy doesn't increase at the same rate. You only need one heater. You don't need 3. So for a low-income family, if the cost of home energy goes up, instead of spending 10% of their budget to heat their home and cool it in the summer, you might be spending 12%. But if you're an upper-income family spending about 3% to heat and cool your home, you only have to spend about 3.1%. You might not even notice the increase. And so what we're concerned about is when we'll receive money to help families pay their bills, and will it be enough? And the problem is the programs aren't keeping up with inflation. So last year, there was about $4 billion made available for LAHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. This year, they're going to make the same amount available, but the cost of energy is going up between 8 and 10%. So we can help a family with about 10% less money buy 10% less fuel. And that falls on those families to pay the bills. Now, the other thing that people often don't recognize is that, so for elderly families, 50% of families that receive Social Security, that is their only source of income. So imagine that your Social Security check went up, I think, this year by 2%. The average Social Security check is about $1,000 a month. So they have about $20 more to work with. But their cost of heating their home has gone up by $100 or $200 during the course of the winter. So what we're seeing is that the cost of energy is becoming less and less affordable. I mean, it was an issue during the gubernatorial campaign in New Jersey, for example. People were concerned. They saw their electric bills were going up faster than inflation, and they were angry about it. But they also were worried about paying the bill. That's what it really is. And so it's not just the cost of food going up, it's the cost of energy going up.
Mark, it's not just the poor, as you mentioned, that are seeing their energy bills skyrocket. Lots of families are blaming those massive server farms that are fueling the AI boom. Should some of these multi-billion and in fact some trillion-dollar companies be forced to foot the bills for those people that are struggling to just keep the heat on?
Well, it's not just for people struggling to pay their regular bills, keep the heat on. It's all consumers are paying more in a lot of states because of the data centers. You know, utilities have to upgrade their systems to provide electricity to data centers. Well, who pays for the upgrade? In a lot of states, the system is one where everybody shares in the cost of upgrading the system. But this is primarily to benefit the data centers. So states are starting to kind of rethink the process to basically charge data centers the full cost of the freight for upgrading it to meet their needs, not sharing it across the whole system.
Going to have to leave it there. Mark Wolf is the Executive Director of the National Energy Assistance Directors Association. Mark, thanks for being with us.
Coming up on Today's It Happened, after a busy week in Washington, we caught up with journalist Maritza Giorgio for her analysis of everything from the drama swirling around the Epstein files to a Senate Democrat defending her choice to join Republicans in voting to end the shutdown. That conversation after the break. After 43 days, the federal government is back open, but only through the end of January. We could be doing this all over again in 2 months. Joining us now is the host of the podcast Grounded, Maritza Giorgio, helping us make sense of everything that might be coming next. So, Maritza, Democrats wanted concessions on health care. They didn't get them. So, did anybody win this government shutdown?
I mean, the short answer is no, Steph. You know, I co-host our Grounded podcast with former Senator John Tester, and we've talked about this a lot for those 43 days, that nobody actually wins in a government shutdown because people suffer, especially as those families start missing payments and paychecks, and they don't know when it might be reopened, and they don't know when they're going to get paid. And then we saw furloughed workers and even layoffs. So the American people lost during the government shutdown. But here's what the Democrats who voted to reopen the government would tell you. They would tell you that they did gain some leverage because they said they brought up this issue. They made the issue top of mind for a lot of American people. And they really pointed out how big of a deal these healthcare subsidies are. And frankly, you know, there are also a lot of other Democrats really upset with those senators who defected, who voted to reopen the government because they felt like, what did we do this for if we weren't going to hold firm on our demands that those subsidies are reinstated?
Well, one of the Democrat senators who helped break that stalemate called into your podcast earlier this week. I want to play a little bit of what she had to say.
We are in this mess because Donald Trump refused to address cost of health insurance because the Republicans refused to address it. And I understand that there are a lot of Democrats who think that the only way to stand up to Donald Trump was to keep the government shut down. We've made the point that this is about the cost of health insurance and health care and how important that is, and we're going to keep fighting. And we've got a date in December when we're going to be able to make another issue, and either they come to the table or we hold them accountable next year.
So, you know, having talked to Senator Shaheen, of course, obviously having a close relationship with former Senator Tester, do you think anything's going to be decided on health care before the midterms next year?
It's really what the Democrats are pushing for and hoping for. And, you know, there are so many speaking out right now. We actually played a clip from Senator Whitehouse in that episode, too, basically saying, hey, this was a no-win situation for anybody, but we got the message out there. His plea to folks on the Democratic side is to not waste time finger pointing right now and arguing over whether or not those senators should have reopened, but to focus on the issue at hand, to get information out to people about healthcare and the costs and what it's going to mean for real families.
Another big issue that we saw during the shutdown, and that was airlines saying, and air travel, hugely impacted by the shutdown. Airlines now saying they're going to be back to normal by Thanksgiving. So are we going to see any lasting impacts on air travel in the holiday season?
Oh, 100%, Steph. And sorry about my internet connection. Sometimes we can't all have wins here on our connections. But yes, we are continuing to see it. And if you think about it, it makes sense. We saw so many flights canceled, delayed, people changing plans, and they're just trying to play catch up, not to mention, you know, just the bureaucracy and trying to get everything back in order as the government reopens, as those airlines start to put flights back on the schedule. So we are going to continue to see headaches, and hopefully they sort a lot of them out by Thanksgiving. But keep in mind too, we're heading into the winter holiday travel season when headaches are just part of the norm anyway. So I have a feeling that it's not going to be a perfect scenario.
Right, and Thanksgiving now less than 2 weeks away. But of course, Maritza, I have to ask you about the other huge issue on Capitol Hill now that the government shutdown is over. So much attention and focus on the Epstein files. Speaker Mike Johnson was bringing the House back. We saw Representative Adelita Grijalva finally get sworn in, becoming that 218th signature on the discharge petition to force a vote on the Epstein file. So is this really turning out to be a bigger issue than the Trump administration initially thought it would be?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about how this is playing out is that it is a slow leak of information, drip, 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 every single day. So when you release 20,000 pages, that is not something any human can process and go through with a fine-tooth comb right away or within a few hours. And so what we're seeing is every single day there's a new email, there's a new piece of correspondence that really has a lot of people talking. Incidentally, we had author and journalist Michael Wolff on our podcast early this week, days before those first email pages were dropped, 2 of those emails from, between Epstein and Michael Wolff. And, there's so much in there that now people are scratching their heads and going, wait, what's this? You think about your email correspondence over how many decades, and maybe you don't remember sending those emails, but a lot of these emails coming to light are really shocking a lot of people. And as we see the days tick by and more of these emails get released and people connect the dots, I think it will continue to take over the news headlines because there's something new every single day. It's not just regurgitating old information.
Maritza Giorgio, host of the podcast Grounded. You can find on Blue Sky, Substack, Instagram, YouTube, all of your typical podcast places. Always great to talk to you, Maritza. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steph.
Thank you for joining us on Today As It Happened. I'm Stephanie Liebergen. Have a great Friday night and an